Hey, everyone. Hi. Hello. Welcome to another episode of Alice.
Hey now.
Greg, what are you doing here?
Hey, what do you mean? Allison,
Where'd you come from, Greg?
I came from the world of Childish, and I just want to make sure that your listeners know that you're just as wonderful on the other podcast you do.
What if they don't have kids?
Don't need them. You don't need them. A lot of our listeners actually tell us they don't have kids. We talk about sex.
We talk about all sorts of dirty stuff, but also parenting stuff.
Yeah, so.
Check out Childish. New episodes every Wednesday, wherever you listen to podcasts.
Maybe I should have got it fixed. Allison Rosen is your new best friend. Allison, with her the good times never end. Allison Rosen, doing the wavy pencil dance again. Allison's your new best friend.
Hey, everyone. Hi. Hello. Welcome to another episode of Allison Rosen is your new best friend. I am thrilled to be in my studio with my guest who I'm going to introduce shortly, and Tony. This is our very first Monday interview in person since all this craziness. We've done now 3 group shows that come out on Thursday, but this is the first Monday one in person. And as with the other ones, I'm overjoyed. And I also feel like, how did I used to do this? Mm-hmm. But I already like this better than the other way.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I'll say that all day long, every day.
Right.
I can't wait to delete Zoom. I'm sure I never will get to. I'm sure it's just going to be a thing that's going to haunt my life till I die.
Yeah, I can't wait to not be paying for premium Zoom or whatever I am that allows me to be able to do this. All that being said, though, not to start off on a bummer, because I like the bummer to come later. Mm-hmm. But I do wonder, are we out of the woods, or are we headed back into potentially another lockdown situation with the variants and all that scariness? So for that reason, I feel like we can't say goodbye to Zoom just yet.
Yeah, I'm just, I don't know. I'm not even going to comment on that because I feel like last time I was like, we're fine. We're going to be fine. Yeah. And then, we all know what happened.
Wait, when was that you said that?
Oh, I mean, like when the coronavirus stuff was like starting to become more of a story, and before everything shut down.
Early March 2020?
Yeah, like something like that.
Yeah. I mean, we've talked so much being like once or twice, but it felt like a lot about the sending an email to everyone on Thursday. Hey, would you guys be available to come in on Monday? Yes. And then Friday, I'm not sure anymore. It changed so fast.
Oh, yeah.
But speaking of, and I don't want to make things too awkward, Tony.
Uh-oh.
But speaking of going back and forth between in-person and Zoom, when you showed up and I said to you, the studio's more set up than usual. And then you're like, oh yeah, I wanted to ask, how come you keep unplugging everything? I couldn't help but notice just a slight edge in your voice. Did I imagine that?
It wasn't intended, but I have been very curious because I'm like, I understand some of why you would unplug certain things, but unplugging everything has confused me. And I've been meaning to ask.
Confused and bothered you?
I wouldn't go so far as to say bothered.
Quite a pause there. I know. I'm making extra work for you.
I mean, it's not hard, except for that time that I accidentally came stoned. It was hard that day.
Yeah. And it wasn't that you accidentally came here stoned. It was that you came here and you were accidentally stoned.
Yes, exactly.
I think that was clear the first time, but just, yes. Everyone go listen to that episode. It's a Thursday show. I believe Hi Tony is in the title, or Tony Stoned, or something
Tim and Jackie were the guests.
That was very fun. Yeah. As I explained to you, having to go back and forth between the setup for in-person guests and the setup for Zoom, I have to move a lot of stuff out of the way. And given the cord spaghetti situation we have here, I feel like instead of getting everything tangled up, I'll just unplug everything and then wrap it up neatly. Mm-hmm. In a way, I feel like that's what a true audio professional like I am would do. But when you get a druggie engineering and producing your podcast, then you get a little pushback. Thank God.
I was simply asking a question.
Oh,
trying to clear up some confusion.
Were you? Okay. Thank God we have a guest to be a buffer for how uncomfortable and awkward it's becoming. This is someone who I have been wanting to have on the podcast for a while because he has quite a story. And then his story got turned into what is now, I believe, the #1 movie on Netflix. Obama is involved, and it seemed like now was especially the right time. It is author, activist, homemaker, and husband of someone that my listeners know because my listeners are quite familiar with Lizzie and Wendy Molyneux because they've both been on the show. He is now married to Lizzie Molyneux. It is Matt Logelin, author of 2 Kisses for Maddy, a memoir of loss and love, which is now a Netflix movie called Fatherhood. Hello, welcome.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Did you feel like I was right in that back and forth with Tony?
I think you probably were. But if he asked me who was right, I might say he was right. So it's really hard. But I guess your name's on the show, so I should agree with you. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
Let's just try what happens if Tony asks you. Tony, do it.
Who do you think was right in this scenario?
Tony, I think you're right to be frustrated when somebody messes with your stuff. So you could be right too. It's really hard for me to say, but I think you're both right, but someone's more right, and I'm not sure who yet, but it might be you too.
I don't think there's anything wrong with asking a question. I was just curious.
Yes.
I was like, that's all.
I think it depends on how you ask it. And you seem like a pretty nice guy, but that was like a kind question, right? Like you didn't come at her with like violence or
I believe if I remember right, I was like, Allison, why the fuck are you unplugging everything?
Yeah, and then he was like, do it one more time and I'm out.
Mm-hmm.
I warned you without warning you, but I warned you with my eyes, like that.
But you didn't throw anything, right? So okay, well, I'm starting to side with
Nothing
Allison
super
here.
heavy.
Okay, that's good. Yeah, that's fine. I think if you keep it light, it's probably fine.
Yeah.
Okay.
Very diplomatic, Matt.
you.
Excellent work.
I have to do this a lot in my life, so...
So I watched the movie last night and I was ready to just weep my eyes out thinking it's going to be a tearjerker. But I found it was emotional. But I felt like they leaned away from the tragic aspects and more into like the heartwarming aspects. Would you agree?
I would totally agree with that. I think, there's a lot of sad stuff in there, but I think if you look at my real life or if you read my book, I tried not to focus necessarily on the morose stuff because I think that's what everybody expects. You go through something really awful, you write about it, and that's going to be the focus for the most part. But I think what they did a really great job of was making sure that there was funny stuff in there and that there was heartwarming stuff, and that the bigger focus, I think, of the movie is kind of what life really is, which is like moving forward in some way or another. So I liked that a lot, and I'm glad they didn't focus too much on the really depressing stuff.
Let's tell everyone what the story is, what your story is.
Yeah, definitely. So in 2007, I was married to a woman named Liz. She was my high school sweetheart, and we...
Different Liz than Lizzie Molyneux.
Yes, this is where things get really confusing. So I've been married only twice, and they've been both to somebody named Elizabeth. So yeah, it adds a lot of confusion to everybody's life. But I was married to my high school sweetheart, and we got married in 2005. In 2007, we bought a house, we decided to have a baby, and she got pregnant. And pretty much throughout her pregnancy, it was like just awful. I mean, she was at every moment was sick. I mean, this was like morning, evening, noon, night sickness, like just all the time. And so she spent a lot of time kind of at home, kind of trying to figure out a way to work at the same time as being pregnant, and eventually ended up on bed rest. And after a pretty awful bout of bed rest, a lot of the things that they were monitoring in terms of her amniotic fluid and just, umbilical cord was wrapped around our daughter's neck. They said, like, you need to come into the hospital. We need to monitor you 24/7. So she went in. She was in the hospital for about 5 weeks or so. I can't remember now after all this time. But she was in the hospital for a bit, and eventually they said, all right, your daughter's big enough and healthy enough that we're going to take her out now, because it's just getting to a point where she's getting so big that the umbilical cord wrapping around her neck is really going to be kind of a problem. And so we prepared for our daughter to be born. She was born 7 weeks early via C-section, and she was perfectly healthy, which is amazing for being 7 weeks early. This was also in 2008, and medical technology has advanced a lot in the last 13 years. But we were super excited about this. We were also a little scared because we didn't know for sure how things were going to go. Our daughter got whisked off to the NICU, and for the next 24 hours or so, my wife was recovering in bed and still on bed rest. And then she ended up having to, it was time to get up and see our daughter for the first time. And so they said, we're going to take you to the NICU. And I was in the room with her, and a nurse came in, and we went to pick her up and get her kind of situated in a wheelchair. And she just said she felt lightheaded and collapsed. And she had a massive blood clot that had gone from her leg up to her lungs and killed her almost, instantly. And so, I was in a spot where I didn't know how I was going to handle this stuff. I was 30 years old, which in LA is a very young dad kind of situation. Yeah. I mean, in any other place in the world, I feel like that's an old dad, but I was still a young dad at 30. And now my best friend and the person I had, spent my entire life with basically was gone. And at the same time, I had a baby that was 7 weeks early, and I didn't know for sure how she was going to be, developing, how she was going to handle things. And so I was terrified, and on top of all of that sort of like mental pain that you're going through, like I also had to deal with all this other stuff in the next couple of weeks, which is now half of my income was gone. My wife actually made more money than I did, and we just bought a house. And, it was just like my entire life just completely imploded, and I had no idea what to do with that. It was just awful,
Oh, it's so sad. There's a moment in the book where she's on bed rest and she removes those like leg massager things.
Yes.
And a nurse just freaks out at her because she's had been so uncomfortable with those on. And as I was reading, I wondered, Could the blood clot have, is such an awful question. I'm sure you asked yourself though. Could the blood clot have been prevented? Like, did that have anything to do with it? Because you did put it in the book, so I wondered, like, is this seeding something? Yeah,
I put it in there just as almost an example of that it wasn't that as the issue, because she put them right back on.
Got it.
The nurse made such a big deal of them after that moment that we were kind of like, oh shit, we better follow these instructions. That said, there was not a mandatory use of them post-op. And that's something that it's been a pretty big deal in the medical community since my wife's death, actually. And
regarding her, because of her?
Because of her, and because of, they want to make sure something like this doesn't happen. So those little machines that they stick at the end of a hospital bed, I mean, they don't cost that much, like $500 or something like that. And then the little leg cuffs that come with them are really inexpensive. And so, if you're thinking about the price of a human life, I mean, it's negligible. There's nothing involved in this. But from a hospital standpoint, these things are expensive, right? You've got to put a $600 device on every single hospital bed. And then all the stuff that comes along with it. And so, I've spoken at a few medical device manufacturers, sort of like things, I've done like some keynote addresses at these things. And actually somebody came to me after one of these and said, I was in the hospital the day your wife died. And I was trying to get the hospital to make these things mandatory in every single hospital bed after every operation. And so at the time, because she was on bed rest, they were using these things before the operation, right? Before she had her C-section. But there was no policy to make it mandatory after. And since she's died, that's been something that, the medical community has really kind of come around and said, like, we want this thing to happen this is just something that has to happen no matter what the surgery is, whether it's pregnancy related, before the operation, after the operation, you need to have these leg cuffs on, because it's just such a common thing that, like, when people are lying there that blood clots can occur. So
yeah. It was at Huntington, right?
It was at Huntington, yeah.
I was telling my therapist, who's over here on the east, this is the east side, right? The valley. What do we call this area?
I don't know. I just call it the valley.
Yeah. I was telling my therapist that I was going to interview you, and she was like, wait, when did this happen? And I think she wouldn't tip her mitt because she's a therapist, but I'm pretty sure she might have known about it too, because she's pretty close with, I think she said she was close with like the NICU social worker who's been there this whole time.
Yeah, and if it's the same one that was there when I was there, and I think it's the same person, I don't want to disparage this person anyway, but there was a social worker in that hospital that was, they were pretty worked up as this was going on. And as it was apparent to them, and I was maybe still in denial that something really catastrophic was happening, they came up and they had said, like, there's a priest here that wants to talk to you. And I kind of lost it at that point. Like, I'm a pretty nice guy. Like, I'm not a violent dude in any way, but I was like...
Not like Tony.
Yeah, not like Tony, who throws really light shit at people all the time. I looked at the social worker and I was like, get that fucking priest out of my face right now, or I'm going to knock him out. And I, like, that's not my reaction to things most of the time. I really run from any sort of conflict, but I was so angry at that moment. And that was sort of like the first moment that I knew that she was going to die. When they start bringing in, I've seen enough movies to know that, like, when the priest arrives, it's like bad news,
Yeah.
And so I was really angry, and I don't know if it was that same social worker, but I had, we had been in the hospital for so long, and we'd encountered all of these nurses and all of these people that worked there. And I remember, and I was completely out of my mind, obviously, but I went in and like, there was like a whole group of nurses meeting with the social worker and a whole bunch of folks in the hospital. And I walked in and I was just like, you guys, I'm really sorry. Like, I felt bad for them too, because they felt responsible for this. And, my feeling around the whole thing, and this is how I've chosen to remember this and how I've chosen to deal with it, is that, like, just shit happens sometimes, and it's awful sometimes, and you can't control everything. And sometimes there's nobody to blame. And I know that if I searched, I could probably find somebody to blame, right? Like, I had so many lawyers contact me after my wife died. I
wanting to bring malpractice.
Oh yeah. They were going to sue the shit out of the hospital. They were going to sue the doctors. They were going to sue everybody. And I talked to her doctor right after this happened, her obstetrician. And there was no way I was going to try to put her through this. Like, I know I spoke to her many times after this happened. She was in therapy because of this. Like, she's never had somebody die like this. And so, no matter what happened, no matter who was right or wrong, it didn't really matter to me. It felt like the only way for me to move forward in my life was to not hold any grudges here. You know what I mean? Like, it wasn't going to bring her back. And, like, who cares about money? Like, it doesn't matter. You know what I mean? Yeah.
That scene in the book where, and that you just mentioned, where, like, all the nurses and the medical professionals, you pass by and you see them in a room and they're all crying.
Yeah.
Like, that was very affecting, because so often we see portrayals of the medical community as, like, stoic and, like, this, on Grey's Anatomy, this happens every single day.
Right.
But and that was kind of my point in mentioning that I think my therapist knows about it. Like, this event really reverberated very widely, because it's so unusual and so tragic. You just said that the way that you choose to see this is, like, bad stuff happens and there's not always someone at fault. In my own experiences with grief, not on this magnitude, but I have always gotten stuck with trying to find fault and with being angry. And I'm like unlike Tony, I'm not a real person who's in touch with my anger that often.
Yeah.
But when it comes to, like, grief and this feeling of someone being taken away from me, I do, like, I really get stuck with finding fault. And, I've been told, and I agree, it's probably like a control thing. It's like, well, if I can find fault, then I can prevent it from happening again. Or that it's like, that's stage 4 of grief, the bargaining, which actually never made sense to me previously. But, so that's really interesting that you were able to kind of get around all of that.
Yeah, I felt like I had to, right? I mean, I was here with this baby suddenly too. If it had been just me, I think things would have been a lot different. Like, I definitely would have gone on, like, the longest bender anybody's ever had. Like, I have friends in Nepal, and I was like, straight up, like, I'm going to just go to Kathmandu. I'm going to, like, live there for the next 6 years. I'm going to grow out my beard and my hair. And, like, I'm just going to get drunk for, like, the next 6 years. I don't care about anything. But I had this brand new baby, and she was my whole life, And I mean, when you sign up to be a father, you hope, and not everybody does this, I guess. But, like, my thing was, I'm just going to be the best dad I can. I'm not going to have all the answers. I'm not going to know what's going on. I'm going to trust my wife has read all the books and she's going to do everything right. And then I'll just do whatever she tells me. So when she was gone, it was suddenly like, well, I don't know how to handle this, first of all. And second of all, I'm just going to have to figure it out, And I walked in, I think if there were any NICU nurses that were there that day that are listening, they would remember this very clearly. But I walked into the NICU not long after my wife died, and my daughter was, she had all these tubes going in and out of her, and she weighed under 4 pounds. She was just tiny. And I picked her up. They had to help me do this, but I was holding her and I just said, you better be the best fucking baby there ever was, because I literally didn't know how I was going to handle this. It's like, I have another daughter now who's 2, and she doesn't sleep, or she didn't sleep. She's gotten better now, but for like 6 months, she just was not sleeping. And I as a person doing that alone, I don't know how I would have handled it. Now I have a wife who also gets up and we switch off and all of that stuff. But had I been alone with a child that didn't sleep, I would have lost my mind for sure. And so I was thankful that she was like as good as I begged her to be, or threatened her to be, because that helped me out,
So where are you now with your grief?
That's a good question. It ebbs and flows for me. I mean, it's still present in my life every single day. I miss my wife. It's really hard to even 13 and a half years later to not have her around. I mean, our daughter now is 13. She is such an amazing kid.
I only know her from social media, but there are pictures of you guys in the back of the book, 2 Kisses for Maddy, which everyone should go get. And that final picture of your wife looks, like spitting image of Maddy. Yeah. It just blows me away.
Yeah, they look very similar. My daughter now is, she's kind of a tomboy, so her hair's short and she kind of dresses like me. But, if you were to put a blonde wig on her, she would look exactly
the smile
like her mom.
face. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's incredible. So, I mean, I have her as a reminder every single day of my wife. And, I'm still incredibly close to my wife's family. I mean, we, to this day, aside from COVID, we've been traveling with them. We go on trips with them every single year. We see them at the holidays. They come and visit us all the time. And so, one of the things that I've tried to do is make sure that those people who are important to her mom are still in her life as much as possible. We've lost touch with some friends over the years, but I still talk to some of her friends here and there. And family, I think, is such an important part of it. It's really nice to be able to have her grandparents around, and I can just put Maddy on a plane and say, you're going to go see Grandma and Grandpa for a week. And then she goes out and sees them. And it's so that's nice. But it also kind of keeps that grief going a little bit, which I think we all need. I mean, I don't know. You don't want to let go of this stuff as much as I wanted to let go of some of it. Some of it's really difficult to hold on to. I mean, the images of somebody dying, especially somebody that you love, I went to sleep every single night thinking and seeing my wife in that hospital bed. And it wasn't, and I know this is so cliche, but it wasn't literally until I wrote my book or got that chapter out of my head that I finally could go to sleep. I was not sleeping for, this is about 1.5 years in that I started writing this. And I didn't sleep at all for 1.5 years. I mean, I was getting some sleep, but it was 1 hour, 2 hours here and there.
Because you make reference to that in the book at some point, but I thought that was because you had a newborn at home. It was because you couldn't sleep.
Yeah, the newborn was great. She slept actually. There's moments in my life where actually I went to the doctor. And early on with a little one like that, you have to make sure that you're feeding them on a kind of a regular basis. So it was every 3 hours. If she was sleeping, I'd have to wake her up. And it was maybe 6 months in, I went to the doctor and I was like, it's really hard. I keep waking her up. When do I let her sleep through the night? And the doctor's like, don't wake her up anymore. That was for the first couple of weeks when she was home. She's fine. Just let her sleep. And when she's hungry, she'll wake up. And I was like, oh, that's great. That's one of those things where somebody tells you to do something and then they forget to tell you not to do something and you just keep doing it, So I was really happy to finally.
That's annoying.
Yeah, it was super annoying, right? I'm like, shit, I could have been sleeping, but really it wasn't her at all. I was, there was a point at which I don't even know I can't remember what triggered it, but I was I couldn't sleep in my room suddenly. I started sleeping out on my couch.
Yeah. In the book you mentioned that while you guys were away, someone had hired a housekeeper to come clean up, and then everything was put back the way it was while she the way it had been when she had been alive, and that like made it so you couldn't sleep in there.
That's right. I haven't read my book in a long. I've never read my book actually, except for the.
I recommend it.
I read it for the audiobook. That's it. But that was like, it was 10 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, you're right. That's what it was. It was somebody had hired a house cleaner. It was really nice. People were always doing great stuff for us. Well, I was kind of going through this, but sometimes they would overstep a little bit.
Right.
You'd have somebody show up at your house and do things that you didn't want them to do and move things you didn't want touched. And I think anybody who's gone through significant grief like this has little things that you don't want people to mess with. It's like whether it's a shirt that you sleep with because it still smells like them or something. I didn't have that exactly, but I know other people who have. And it's like somebody comes in and washes that shirt and it's like shit. Or like, somebody is like, well, you're paying $100 a month for their cell phone. I'm going to cancel this. And it's like, I've had people who's lost voicemails from their husband or their wife or whatever. And that's heartbreaking, right? Like it's their last sort of way to hold on. And, so when somebody messes with that, even with the best intentions, it's really difficult.
Was the inability to sleep, was it a fear of like letting go, a fear of relaxing? Was it like a hypervigilance?
I think it was some of that. It was also just like, I spent all this time with this person. She, in my mind, was the most beautiful person on earth. And to be left with the last image of her is just so like grotesque and just like gruesome. And it's just like, I don't know if you've ever had anything in your head that you're like, I don't want to think about this anymore. I don't want to do it. And the more you tell yourself you don't want to think about it,
don't think of a pink elephant.
Yeah, exactly. And that's all you think about. And so when I was home alone with, if Maddy was asleep, which she was frequently, I was just left to myself. I didn't have people. Most of my family and friends are in Minnesota. So people weren't here all the time. They weren't here, hanging out with me when she'd go to sleep. It was just me. And that's a really hard thing when it's just you and your thoughts and you have nothing else to do and you're in the house that you bought with your wife and she's not there. It's just like the worst things come to your mind sometimes. It's just awful.
In the movie, Kevin Hart, who plays you, is kind of thrown out of that room. Violently is too strong. I reserve that for Tony. But the medical people who come into the room when the wife is dying are like, get out.
Yeah.
What happened in real life?
That's very accurate.
Okay.
Mainly because they're just trying to get so many people in the room.
Yeah.
And so there were several nurses and, there's doctors. Everybody's rushing in. And I think there's some like, they're trying to preserve your mental health in some way there. So you're not seeing some of that, but also there's just no space. So I got tossed out of that room really quickly, which is why then a social worker shows up with a priest and they're all trying to kind of corral you and like keep you away from that room for lots of different reasons. But yeah, that was very accurate. In fact, watching that movie back, those moments I think are the hardest for me because Kevin, just bless him in so many ways. Like as a comedian, I didn't know he'd be able to handle a movie like this. And he brought the same kind of level of emotion and the feelings back that I felt like I was having in those moments. And then encountering Alfre Woodard, who plays my mother-in-law, same exact thing. I mean, that happened exactly as it did in the movie, in my real life. And it was like awful to watch that part. I watched it with my in-laws, my late wife's parents, and we were all just like, holy shit, this is way too close to reality. It was really hard to watch.
How come they chose to use everyone's real names?
I don't know, actually. When we were talking about this movie, I kind of figured they would change everybody's names. Because
they do change a lot of elements. It's the same story, but there are details that are changed.
Yeah, there's a lot of things that were changed, and they preserved the names.
For example, Kevin Hart is very short.
He is very short. I am slightly taller than him, and he has better abs than I do. Otherwise,
your spitting image.
Yeah, the differences they end at that point. And he's funnier, I guess. But so there were a lot of liberties taken, and I think a lot of that has to do with just the fact that like if you read my book and you watch a movie, my book doesn't translate well to a movie. It's like basically Sony and everybody involved in this could have pretended like this was somebody else's story and not paid me. And I never would have guessed it was me. Because this stuff happens from time to time. Yeah. And I never would have been the wiser. I would have just been like, oh man, it must be some other guy's story.
You're like, it's so similar to me.
Yeah. And those things
get in
have
touch
happened.
with him.
Yeah, I gotta sue somebody. But yeah, it's one of those things where like I think that they decided that they wanted some they wanted like a tribute to us in a lot of ways, because everybody I talked to throughout this process, from all of the producers I spoke to from the beginning, to the screenwriter, to the director, to everybody who's involved in this movie, the actors, everybody, they said, we want to make a movie that your family's going to be proud of. And I think because of so many of the changes that were present there, they wanted to use our real names, because the most accurate part of the movie, I think, revolves kind of around me and Maddy and my late wife Liz, and then Lizzie, who's actually in the movie as well. And then from there, everybody else's names got changed. So my in-laws' names got changed.
Oh, right. Marion was not. Yeah.
And my mother-in-law in that movie is not at all like my mother-in-law in real life. She's like a super nice lady, and she was never overbearing and never asked me to do anything like give up my child. But she got to be played by Alfre Woodard. So like, it's like they could have made her a murderer and she would still have to be happy because it's Alfre Woodard. Like, just, you have to deal with that. And yeah, my dad was like dead in the movie. Basically, they allude to him being like a drunk and like a philanderer. And he's not that way. He's been married several times, but he's not like a bad dude like they made in the movie. So, there were a few things that were changed, and some people probably aren't happy about him. But the good news is I got to like warn my close family and be like, yeah, this is what's going to happen.
How many times has your dad been married?
4. He's on his 4th right now, actually.
How's it going?
Seems fine. I think this one's going to stick. This has been his longest marriage. He doesn't have any children with this woman, so I think that helps too. And all of his kids are growing. So,
Matt, when you were talking about the trouble you had sleeping, it occurred to me that perhaps if you had a really comfortable mattress, things might have been different. I don't want to, gloss over what was a real rough time for you, but I'm just saying, doesn't it seem like the world's against us from getting a good night's sleep this time of year, Tony?
Yeah.
But when you have a purple mattress, you can sleep cool and comfortable, no matter what the world throws at you. That's because only purple mattresses have the grid. And normally I have a little sample. Oh, there it is, over there, next to, right there. Thank you, Matt. Matt is bringing it, even though there's not a video component of this particular episode. But go to past episodes, youtube.com/AlisonRosen, and maybe you'll land on one where I show the grid to the camera. I just like to touch it and feel it's just so it's cool and it feels good in my hands. So the grid is a unique ventilated design that allows air to flow through and to help you sleep cool, even when it feels like 1,000 degrees out, which I think it is. I think it was 1,000 degrees in the Arctic. Yeah, that's not concerning. And the grid is amazingly supportive for your back and legs while cushioning your shoulders, neck, and hips, no matter how you sleep. Unlike memory foam, the grid bounces back as you move and shifts, so you never get that I'm stuck feeling like you do with memory foam. Try your purple mattress risk-free with free shippings and returns. Financing is available too. Purple is comfort reinvented. Right now, you'll get 10% off any order of $200 or more. Go to purple.com/bestfriend10 and use promo code bestfriend10. That's purple.com/bestfriend10. Promo code bestfriend10 for 10% off any order of $200 or more. Purple.com/bestfriend10, promo code bestfriend10, terms apply. So Matt, could you tell me about the writing process itself? You know what? Here's what I'm going to do, because I'm a professional. I'm going to throw like 3 questions at you.
Go for it.
Okay. I want to know about the writing process of the book and how that got turned into a movie. I want to know about you meeting Lizzie Molyneux, and falling in love again and sort of what that's been like. And then also about how much you were involved in the making of the movie, because I know from reading the book and watching the movie now that like there's a compressed timeline. So they had to be getting info from you about what happened in your life after.
Yes.
Take it away.
All right. I'll start with the book.
Okay.
So I don't know how to write. The first lines in this book are actually, I am not a writer, because I literally didn't know what I was doing. I'd been writing a blog before my wife died, actually. And it was mainly I was just posting photos of like my travels. I was traveling for work a lot and was living in India for a bit here and there. And so
you worked for Yahoo, right?
I did work for Yahoo for a while. And so I was just posting photos that I thought that were interesting. This is before social media existed, like no Flickr before that or Instagram now and all that stuff. So it was just a website to dump photos and show my friends what I was doing.
Yes. I found sort of the shell. It said I did not have permission. I was not invited to read the post, but I found sort of the frame of it. And it was such a fun trip down memory lane to see like all the other blogs linked on the side, the way it used to be.
Yeah, I decided before the movie came out, I was like, people are going to look for me again. And I know people can still find a lot of stuff, but I was like, that's like a relic of the mid 2000s. I was like, let's just get rid of this shit for now. Maybe I'll bring it back. But I had that. And then I was writing to my family via the blog just as my wife was going through everything and just wanted a repository so they could come read and see what was happening and that we didn't have to take phone calls. We both have rather large families and people were just calling us nonstop. So then after she died, I was still writing as a way to kind of keep them updated and also as kind of like a diary for my daughter. I wanted her to be able to go back and read this stuff because I knew I would forget it. I think just parents in general kind of forget stuff. They forget the first steps and the first haircut and all that stuff.
I am shocked how much so many things with Elliot. I'm like, how could I ever forget this? And just 2 years later, I have Owen and I'm like, I cannot remember anything about. I should have written it down. Go ahead.
Did you have your baby? You didn't fill out that baby book that you got for one of your showers? I'm sure.
I did not. I do have notes here and there, but I mean, in general, if someone said when did he start talking? I'd be like, I don't remember which month.
Yeah, it's super embarrassing because my kid asks me that all the time. She's like, when did I take my first steps? I'm like, well, I think I remember that, but I don't remember what you said. So anyway, it gets bad. But I do have it written down somewhere and it's archived and she can read it someday when I'm dead or whatever. But, that's how it kind of started. And so this blog was going for a bit. And then, it was weird. In 2008, that's what a lot of people were doing this stuff. I had no intention. And I guess I was pretty naive about it. I didn't think anybody would actually read this thing. I was like, well, this will be for my family and my friends. And then suddenly, I was seeing these stats, which I wasn't paying attention to, but suddenly I'm getting 40,000 page views and suddenly I'm getting 800,000 page views. Now I've got 1 million page views. It's like, holy shit, what's going on here? So people were just reading it nonstop. And when you do anything that kind of somewhat popular or viral or whatever you want to call it nowadays, vultures start to circle a little bit. It's like somebody out there thinks they can make money. And that was not my intention. I didn't have an idea to write a book. I didn't think this is what I'm going to do. My wife is going to die and I'm going to write a book and I'm going to get super famous in some small circle. It was not it. I had no intention. I got an offer to write a book about a month and a half after she died.
Wow.
And it was through a friend of hers who she went to high school with, who knew somebody through her college who worked at a publishing house. And I was like, I straight up just said no way. There's no way I can do this. I don't want to do this. I want nothing to do with this. And
did it feel icky to you, the idea?
Yeah, it felt super gross. I mean, you can even in the midst of the worst moment in your life, you can feel exploitation in a lot of ways. I can think about the time right after my wife died, I suddenly started getting all this free formula and diapers in the mail. And I was like, oh, that's really nice. And then I saw who it came from. And it was from my friend's dad. And I was like, oh, that was really nice of him. And then I realized, holy shit, this guy was on the board at Huntington. He was trying to keep me from suing them. And again, I had no intention of suing anybody, but this preemptive, hey, we're going to give you all this necessary shit to keep your baby alive so that you don't come after us was kind of gross. And it made me kind of really not feel good about things. But same kind of thing with this. It's when people are reaching out and saying hey, why don't you write a book about your wife dying? It's well, no, that seems awful. I don't, first of all, I don't like to write. I fucking hate writing. I really do. And so I wanted nothing to do with it. As time continued to pass, I ended up on Rachael Ray's show. I ended up on Oprah. And, when that happens, I was in People magazine. When that happens, I mean, you can't even imagine the number of people that start coming after you. And again, especially at that time in the world in 2008, there was nobody bigger than Oprah, right?
Did you have misgivings about going on those shows at all?
Yeah, totally. The Rachael Ray thing, I went to do something with, I'm trying to think who it was. It was a UN group that was doing some vaccination stuff, and they were doing some stuff getting, they were working with Pampers. So there was kind of this charitable aspect to it where I was like, okay, I'll go because I'm going to get involved. I actually met Salma Hayek and we went to this whole, it was a really weird day, but a lot of it was charity related. I went on Oprah because I had just started a nonprofit organization named after my wife. It's called the Liz Logelin Foundation, and we give money to widowed families with kids. Well, I just started it. We hadn't even gotten our 501c3 designation from the government yet. And when Oprah called, I was like, listen, it was literally the 1 year anniversary of my baby being born and my wife's death. I'd taken off to Mexico with a couple of my best friends and their family. And we just I was like, I'm going to just tune out for a week or two and we're just going to relax. And then Oprah calls and they're
was it actually Oprah?
No.
Okay.
No, it wasn't even Gail. It kind of sucked. It was somebody else.
Was it Stedman?
He doesn't even get to touch the phone anymore. I don't think back then he even was allowed. So
was it her best friend, Prince Harry?
It might have been. It was like some producer who disguised
Dr.
his
Phil?
voice, and it was crazy. And so they were like, we want to like interview you. And I was like, okay, that's fine. And so I was down in Mexico. The infrastructure sucked. I couldn't get on. I couldn't get like Wi-Fi that was going to be good enough, or even like a plugged-in connection. And so Oprah's like, well, we need you to come to Chicago. And not Oprah again, but somebody at Oprah was like, we need you to come to Chicago. I was like, I'm in Mexico. And they're like, we're going to fly you first class and your baby. And we're just going to fly you back to Chicago. You'll be there for 24 hours. And then you just fly back to Mexico.
They couldn't just wait till you were back?
That's what I was like. Can you just like wait? Like,
yeah.
And my trip was like,
they're like, we're going to air in 10 minutes. So we're going to need you here right now.
It was super weird, but it's also like Oprah.
Yeah.
And because I just started this nonprofit, I was like, this is really good exposure. Like even if we don't have our 501c3, we can start getting donations coming in, and those, if they're made in the same calendar year that you get your designation, they're still tax deductible for everybody. And so I thought, okay, I have to do this for this thing that I've created. I want to make sure that we're making a difference in the lives of all these families. So I'm going to suck it up and I'm going to go. So I told my friends, I'm like, sorry, you guys are going to hang out in Mexico for a couple of days. You get this condo to yourself, like enjoy it. I'll be back. And then we'll spend 2 days together and you'll go home. And so, so I flew to Chicago, did the whole thing.
Was Maddy with you?
Maddy was with me. And they were like, it was like, I think this is like, I'm probably not even legally supposed to talk about this, but I'm going to. It's been a long time. I got to the show and they were like, okay, well, it's really hard to have kids and dogs on TV. So we're not going to have Maddy come out. She was a year old. And so they're like, we'll keep her. Somebody in the green room will watch her or whatever. Like, okay, that's fine. Somebody's just going to watch my kid. And they're like, also, you can't talk about your foundation.
What?
And I was like, I straight up told them my one condition for coming was that I could talk about this, right? I said I wanted to make sure that this was the whole reason I was coming, because it's the 1 year anniversary of my wife's death. This feels to me like exploitation of the worst kind, and I don't want the focus to be on me. We can talk about my story, we can talk about things that have happened to my family, but I want to pivot that to something good,
You said that to the person in the moment. That's good.
Oh, I straight up said it to this producer. And I was like, I told him, I'm like, this is bullshit. And like, if I were a bigger asshole, I'd walk out of here right now. But I was like, maybe something will happen here. And Oprah did, like, when I finally got out there and everything, they were kind of like, oh yeah, and he started this foundation to help family. Didn't mention the name. They didn't put it on any of the website or anything like that. It was just like, they just kind of said it. And if somebody like looked for it pretty hard, they could find it. But it was just kind of like, that sucks. That really sucks. And then another segment, they had like a guy come out with he had like 6 kids and a dog. And I was like, why? So it was like all this stuff they told me, that, and then suddenly this guy with his kid and kids and dogs show up. And I'm like, why can't I bring my kid out? Anyway, it was just like a really frustrating experience. And so, like I said, it's just people start circling when this stuff happens. And so, after Oprah, I was getting calls from all these agents. I mean, like literally name every agency in the world. Like WME was calling me. WME, I was like, what is that? I thought it was like a cigarette. Because it was William Morris.
You thought it was Philip Morris?
I thought it was Philip Morris. I'm like, why is a cigarette company trying to call me? I'm as far outside of the world of publishing and like Hollywood as anybody could possibly be, especially at that time. So I was like, a cigarette company's calling. This is really fucking weird. And so I flew to New York and
to meet with Philip Morris.
Himself. I got like a couple of packs of smokes. It was great. But I met with all these people, and I think it was the guy at WME was like, listen, we think your book's going to be a big hit. We found a guy who's going to ghostwrite it for you. And, he's in Nashville. He works for like Christian imprint. I'm like, have you read anything? Like, I am not religious at all. Like, I am the opposite of religious. So I'm like, you're promising me that a guy from your Christian imprint is going to ghostwrite my book and it's going to be out in like 2 months. And I was like, no, fuck this. So I was done with that guy. I was meeting with all these different people. And I finally sat down these 2 women that worked for like some small agency I'd never heard of. They took me out to breakfast. And I had my daughter with me and they were like, it was a buffet or something. And they said, hey, do you want to go get some breakfast? And I was like, yeah, it's, I'm trying to hold. And they're like, let me hold Maddy. And I was like, right then and there, I was just done. I was like, I'm signing with them. I don't need to hear their pitch. I don't need to know anything about their agency or whatever. And so I signed with them like right on the spot. And it was probably the best like experience of my life, because here were 2 people that really cared about me and they cared about Maddy as a person. And like I said, when the sharks are circling, you want like ones that are going to like just be nice to you and not bite you. And too many were trying to eat me,
So wait, I think the last we heard about the book, though, you were like, no, I'm not a writer. So at what point did you then decide, yes, I am going to write a book?
When all these people said they could make money on me.
Oh, okay. So when the circling happened, then you're like, maybe I will do it.
Yeah, I thought, the idea is that like if all these people think they can make money on me, why should?
Oh, I see. So all these people were circling, wanting to represent you for the book.
Yes, for
the book. I thought maybe they were like, and for personal appearances or something like that. So this was so the two women were from a small book agency.
Yeah, sorry,
Got
for
it.
a small book agency. Yes, because the whole thing was that like I think in 2008, like every blogger on earth was trying to get a book deal, and every agent in New York was trying to get a blogger to write a book.
Yeah,
and it was just crazy at that time. I mean, there were a million different people out there, mostly like mommy bloggers, I think, that were getting just insane advances on books. And
Deuce.
Yeah, right. Deuce. Yeah. She was like everyone's goal. And it was like her books were so successful and she was so successful in what she was doing that the agents were like, where can we find the next Deuce? And they were like, I guess they thought maybe I was that. And so, yeah, so they just started like all these agents were calling. And when I did finally sign this contract, my agents were like, okay, here's an example of what a book like proposal looks like. Cause I had no idea how to write one. They're like, just kind of copy this format. We need like a chapter from you. We need kind of an intro and a conclusion or whatever. And we'll send this out to publishers. And they said, if you're lucky, maybe we'll get one or two that are interested and, we'll see how it goes from there. And so they sent out my proposal on a Friday. And this is, I have to like say this. I'm not trying to brag about any of this. This is like such a weird thing for me to talk about, but it helps kind of paint the picture of like how weird this experience was for me. So they sent it out on a Friday and they said, hopefully we'll hear something in a couple of months. And on Monday, I got a call before I even made it to my office where I worked at Yahoo. And they were like, we need you here on Wednesday. We have 13 publishers that want to meet with you.
Wow.
And it had gone out to 18. So I guess 5 of them were like, fuck this. But the other 13 were like, we want to meet you. And so I had to like go into my boss at Yahoo and be like, I need like the next week off. And he was like, why? And so I told him, and it was just like this weird conversation. And I had to call up my in-laws because they were the only ones in my orbit that had the means to just drop everything because they were retired and they had money and they could just fly to New York and help me out. So it's like, I need you in New York on Wednesday to take care of Maddy while I meet with publishers. And they probably thought I was making it up. Like, I really think they thought I was like out of my mind or that like I had imagined all of this.
How old was Maddy at this point?
She was a year and a half old.
Okay.
Yeah. So, I mean, I was still in the midst of all this. And so they met me in New York and I was like, okay, we're going to go meet with Random House tomorrow. We're going to go meet with Penguin. We're going to go. And I swear they thought I was out of my mind, but they went with me to all these meetings so they could take care of Maddy in the hallway. And yeah, I mean, it was a crazy thing to have that thrust upon you and suddenly have all of these publishers and all of them huge publishers in New York, like just throwing themselves at me.
Did it still feel exploitative?
Totally. It felt gross as hell. And I had to multiple times, I had to like think about in the back of my mind, like, how do I justify this? Because I understand that exploitation. I understand that I'm now a part of that machine. And so I was like, this is, to me, is so disgusting. And
because like you went to grad school, you're an iconoclast, I'm going to say.
Yeah, I think so. I'd like to think of myself that way.
But that comes through in the book.
Yeah.
So I could see a special look. I keep pointing it out, but it's become my defining characteristic. I'm Gen X.
Yeah.
So I get it.
Yes, I think you do.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. It's like, I didn't want people to feel that way. I didn't want Maddy to feel that way someday. I didn't want her family to think that I was exploiting the situation.
You don't want someone to go like, well, there was an upside to the tragedy. Like, that's the grossest.
Yeah, it's gross, and it manifests itself much later when things got better in my life. When somebody wrote me at one point and was like, I liked you better when you were sad. And it's like,
ick.
That's the kind of gross shit you don't want to hear from somebody. But that happened, And so I kind of felt like, because I could hear this in the back of my mind all the time. My wife was a very, very practical person. Like, she was like, we're going to save money. We're going to buy a house. We're going to do this. When I did impractical stuff, she got pretty upset with me. So I kept hearing her in the back of my mind saying like, how are you going to provide for this baby? Like, you don't have many talents. Like, you're not especially good at your job. You're not going to suddenly become like CEO of Yahoo at some point. Like, you're going to just slowly move your way up the chain. And someday maybe you'll make enough money to like move out of our tiny house. So I was trying to think of like, how could I support this child? How am I going to figure out a way to make sure that I can continue to pay our house payment and our kid has food and clothes? And I thought, well, if all these assholes think they can make money on me, why shouldn't I make enough to like take care of my kid? I wasn't trying to make like fuck you money and like buy an airplane.
Right.
I just wanted to have like clothes for my kid and for me. And so that's kind of why I was like, all right, I'm going to try this. And so the first words in the book, as I said, are I'm not a writer. And that's truly how I felt about it. And that was the first word in the proposal. And one of the publishers I met with was like an iconic publisher. It's like one of my favorite. Like they put out all these books that I love. This poet John Berryman is one of my favorite writers. They published all of his stuff after he died. And I went, and it was like this really classic sort of movie moment where I walked in by myself. I think my agents were outside, and this dude was facing the other way in a spinny chair, and he turned around and he's holding my proposal in his hand. He's like, "You're not a writer, huh?" And I was like, "Yeah, no, I'm not." And he's like, "That's a hell of a way to start a book proposal." He's like, "Why should I care about this?" And we had a great conversation. And I think they ultimately didn't offer me a contract. But it was like one of those things where, I was trying to put it on the table because I felt like there was a really good chance I was never going to get this done. I was going to fail at this at the highest level because all these people thought I could do it. And I didn't believe I could. And the way I kind of look at it is like, let's say you've got like plumbing that's leaking. And you're really desperate for somebody who like needs to fix your plumbing. And you're like, "Hey, Matt, can you like fix my plumbing?" And you're like, "Well, I've never done it before, but if you pay me enough and you don't hold me accountable for what damage can happen, and you don't care that like I'm just going to take off with this money, like sure, I'll do it. I'll give it a shot." Like
I would never have you be my plumber.
Please don't. I'm like the worst. I have a neighbor who calls me about plumbing shit all the time. I think she thinks I'm somebody different. I have no idea what she's talking about. But really, that's kind of the way I felt about it. I was like, okay, this is all on them. This is their issue. Like they have to figure this out. And if they can't, then I guess I'll take the third of my advance that they prepaid me, and I'll go live in Mexico for a couple of years or whatever. But yeah, that's kind of how it went. And so eventually we ended up with this publisher, and they turned out to be great. I had an amazing editor who walked me through this process because I have no idea what I'm doing. I think of books as being sort of, especially a memoir like this, it's like a very linear process. We were writing about the first year of my wife's, of my life after my wife died, first year of my daughter's life together with me. And as I was writing it, my editor would be like, "Okay, we're going to take one chapter. We're going to move it to the front." And we're going to, so everything got moved around. And I was like, "Well, this is not how it happened." And she's like, "It doesn't matter. Most people who are going to read this aren't thinking about this on a timeline, and they don't give a shit when it happened. Let's just make sure this works great. Like write a transition between these two chapters and we'll be fine." So we did that. And then the book came out. I think I had told everybody that I met with, I was like, it's going to take me, the first people I met with, I said, it's going to take me 2 years to write this. And then they were like, not happy about that. And when I got out, my agents were like, never say that again. Tell them 6 months and we'll figure it out. So I started saying a year.
They should have told you that ahead of time.
I wish I would have known. Because I was trying to be honest and set expectations, which is something I do well in my life. But that didn't work. And so I had to start lying and telling everybody I could get it done in a year or 6 months. And when I finally signed the contract, I left my job. I quit my job at Yahoo, which I was doing pretty well in actually after all this. And walked away from a lot of money and moved to India for a couple of months. I brought a nanny along, somebody I met like at a concert. She went and worked for free for me.
Wow.
I was like, I'll cover all your expenses, but I can't afford to pay you because my advance wasn't that big. And so like we hung out in India for a couple of months. And the idea behind that was to get as far away from everybody I knew as possible. If I could get halfway around the world, I couldn't have anybody just show up at my house. I couldn't have anybody calling me because we were literally 12 hours apart. And I knew a few people there that if I needed some help or if I needed anything, they would be there to help me out. And so, so I just wrote every single day. I would go to
Did the nanny
breakfast.
like you?
No, she did not,
okay.
Thankfully. I think she kind of liked ladies for a while. I'm not sure where she sits now, but yeah, it wasn't anything like that, thankfully. There were a few ladies who did like me who were lobbying to go on that trip. And I'm glad I didn't say yes to that because that could have been a real problem for me. And I would not have finished what I needed to finish. And so, it was hard enough as it was. I was missing every single deadline. Basically, it was as we negotiated our contract for the book before I left to actually write it, I was already like several months behind because we got a lawyer involved and all this stuff was happening. And I was missing out on all this time to write. And I was told not to write until I signed the contract. And the publisher was thinking like, oh, he must be writing this whole time. So about 5 to 6 months passed before I actually put, my fingers to the keyboard.
Right.
And it was bad news. So from there, I missed every single deadline. I got threatened multiple times that they were going to drop my book. I looked at every legal option to make sure I wasn't going to get sued for the 1/3 of the advance they'd already paid me. And just tried to figure out how I was going to survive now on 1/3 of my advance instead of all 3/3 of it. But eventually I got it done, and the book came out in 2011. And surprisingly, it did really well. It spent like a couple of weeks, 6 weeks or something on the New York Times bestseller list. It got named like Goodreads at the time was nothing. Nobody cared about it, but it like beat Tina Fey's like Bossy Pants book as like best memoir, which is like so embarrassing to me because like clearly like I had a nice online presence of idiots who were like out there voting for it. And I would never win another contest like that in my life, but it got a lot of attention. And even before the book was out, we were getting like requests to make a movie and things like that. So Hallmark came to me before the book was written and they were like, we want your life rights. We want to make a movie based on your life. And I called some people and I was like, at this time I didn't have a movie agent. I just had a TV person or a book person. So I called them up and I was like, listen, I need some help. And this was somebody at CAA. I got given their name and their information. And I didn't think CAA would actually give a shit about somebody like me, but they were like, let's get you in a meeting. So they had me meeting with TV and movie and speaking engagements and all this crazy stuff. And so they were like, you're not making a Hallmark movie. This is not happening. So we told them no way. And they were like, oh, that's fine. We read about another guy in People magazine whose wife died. And now all these women are donating like their breast milk. So we're going to make a movie about him. And I was like, that was like one of those moments where I was like, wow, this is a vicious world to be in. And I always heard that Hollywood was shitty like that, but I was like, wow, that is like next level bullshit.
Right.
And then my agent had been like pitching my book around town and nobody wanted it. Like, not one studio cared about it. There was one producer whose name I was hearing early on and he seemed interested, but like it didn't sound like he could get it done. So we kind of gave up on it. And then Lifetime came along. And nothing is more terrifying than somebody coming to you and saying like, hey, Lifetime wants to make your life into a movie. And it's like, oh shit. It's like, does it have to be Lifetime? And so I talked to my agent about it and she's like, listen, the way these things work all the time, because the way you talked about the movie at the beginning, right? Now, the one that you've seen that's out at, made by a major studio and all that, like they do things differently and they do things better. And I feel like with Lifetime movies, they're a cliche for a reason, right? They're just kind of shitty and they're morose and they're going to lean into the sadness more than any of the sort of like uplifting things that come. And so it was a scary thing. But at the same time, I'd quit my job. I had burned through my advance pretty quickly. So I was trying to figure out more ways to make money. And one of those ways was like, okay, let's sign this contract with Lifetime.
Also, if anyone from Lifetime is listening, sitting next to the NICU nurses, no offense, but I feel like a Lifetime movie has there's like a feeling that it could be disposable.
Absolutely. And it felt like it's been done before a bunch of times. But what really kind of turned things a little bit for me was at the time, Marta Kaufman had signed on with Netflix, or not Netflix, sorry, with Lifetime to start producing some movies. And so this was at the time, she had like Jennifer Aniston and everybody was writing Lifetime movies or producing them or directing them or whatever was going on. But she'd gotten all of these people who are kind of unimpeachable in Hollywood, right? And they said, we're going to try to change the face of Lifetime. We're going to try to make movies differently. And so my movie was going to be one of those movies, right? And so I met with Marta. I had this great moment with Marta where I went to her little studio in her office in Hollywood. And I walked in and her Emmys are all over the place. And she's got the giant TV and everything. And she's like, I don't want her to be offended by this if she ever listens to this. But she was like, so what's your favorite episode of Friends? And I was like, I've never watched Friends, and I had never seen an episode of Friends. I literally didn't. It was on when I was in college and I was doing other things and I just wasn't watching TV at the time. And so I was just like so embarrassed, and she played it off and she was totally fine with it. But I was just like, holy shit. Like, I wish I had a better answer. I wish I could have made something up, but I was just like, I've never seen it. But yeah, so like we had this whole experience where I actually sat with her and a couple of writers that had worked on some stuff with her and kind of thought this might actually go. And I was dreading it the whole time, and we'd had to sign all these contracts about there was a part in the contract that said like, well, we may turn this into a TV show afterwards. We might adapt this into like a series, which they'd done with some Jennifer Love Hewitt movie about her being a prostitute or something. Like, she was, what did Joel McHale call it on The Soup? It was like the Jennifer Love Hewitt jerk off hours. It was like her as a massage therapist or something and whatever.
Right.
So they were like, we're going to do this to you. And so I had to sign these contracts that were like, is it okay? Or like, you're signing away your right that if we depict Maddy as having committed a felony in her teen years, that you can't sue us.
Jeez.
So I was like, holy shit. I'm like talking to lawyers. I'm like, is this cool? And they're like, if you want the money, you got to do it. And in the back of my head, it was just my agent over and over again saying, they're never going to make this show. They're never going to make this movie. Take the money and run.
Right.
So I trusted her and I was like, okay, let's just see what happens. And sure enough, they optioned it for 2 option cycles, I think, and then they just killed it. And I was like, thankfully, again, a lot of great people involved. They paid me nicely and it was fine, but it just wasn't where I wanted to be. And again, I never had a dream of making a movie. I didn't want this. I was just trying to find, instead of selling diet pills or whatever, this was like my way of making enough money to like survive.
I like that the alternative career path would be selling diet pills.
Oh my God. You should see all the bloggers out there that did that. There were all these like crazy bloggers that went from making money on their blogs. And then when the advertising revenue dried up, they started selling shilling diet pills and all sorts of weird shit. So, that was an alternative lifestyle I could have lived. I'm glad I didn't.
Hang on one second.
Yes.
I don't know about you guys, but all of this is bringing up a lot of emotion in me. I'm the queen of segues. I don't know if you know that about me.
I'm loving this.
So good, right? It's how do I do it? Week in, week out. And yet I always am able to do it, except for the few times that I haven't been able to. But listen, Allison Rose is Allison Rose, this is serious. Allison Rose is Your New Best Friend is sponsored by BetterHelp Online Therapy. As we begin to see the light at the end of the COVID tunnel, a lot of people are still feeling down and emotionally out of sorts. You may not feel depressed or at a total loss, but if you're feeling a little bit off or your relationships are suffering, that could be a sign you should talk to somebody. An informal poll of everyone that I've spoken with says that everyone is feeling off right now. It is a weird time. Online therapy can help. I have a couple friends who are doing therapy through BetterHelp right now, and they really like their therapist. One of them the first one wasn't a great match, but then she's now with a different person through BetterHelp and feels like that person is really helping her. And that's one of the things I like a lot about BetterHelp is that if you feel like the first therapist you're matched with, if you don't feel like you're vibing with them. Is that a therapist-y term? I don't think so. You can change as many times as you want. There's no extra charge. So you don't have to feel like, oh God, so starting therapy with someone new, especially in a virtual setting, that feels like a commitment. I don't know, blah, blah, blah. These are all I remember the first time. I'm a big fan of therapy. And I remember before going to therapy the very first time thinking, but I'm going to be stuck with this person. And what if I don't like them? And da-da-da. So I think those are all very normal thoughts. And you are not stuck with them. They will get you to the right person. And a lot of traditional therapists right now have insane wait lists for all the reasons that we talked about at the beginning. So with BetterHelp, you can definitely get to someone faster. It's more convenient and more affordable than in-person therapy, and financial aid is available. Our listeners get 10% off their first month at betterhelp.com/bestfriend. That's better, HELP.com/bestfriend, betterhelp.com/bestfriend. Okay. So shilling diet pills, you were saying?
Yeah, I could have done that and I could have made lots of money, I'm sure. But that seemed like on another level of like gross. It was like trying to like talk people into losing weight is like so gross and fucked up. And so, so I'm glad that wasn't an option for me. And I mean, it was, but I decided not to take it. And so, when Lifetime walked away and they said, we're not making this movie, I was kind of relieved. It was like, all right, cool. I can move forward with my life in a different way. I don't have to think about this stuff anymore. I don't have to consider what's going to be happening. I don't have to think about who's going to watch this movie someday and, be mad at me or whatever it might be. And a couple of months after that, my agent came to me and was like, she's like, we have another offer and somebody wants to make your movie. And I was like, who now? It's like, I mean, I guess it kind of was like on this nice continuum where it went from like, Hallmark to Lifetime, and you would think it would go up, but I thought it was going to go downhill. Like some dude wants to make it out of his basement or something. And they were like, well, no, it's like TriStar Productions, and it's Sony wants to be involved, and they want to make this movie, and like Channing Tatum's production company's involved, and it's like all this shit. I was like, wait, what?
Like very legit.
Yeah, it was real people. And so I thought, well, this is crazy. Like this might actually happen. And so at the same time, I was also like, it's never going to happen. Like they'll just
When
option
was this?
Oh my God, this must have been about 2013, 2014, somewhere in there. So I just assumed again, like, okay, we'll sign another contract. They'll have the option for, I think it was like, 18 months or something, and then it'll just die. So 18 months came, and they re-optioned it, and they're like, we want to keep working on this. And then another 18 months came up, and they're like, we want to option this again. And then that kind of just kept happening. They'd extend it for a couple of months here and there. And they really, it felt different this time. It felt like they were really trying to make it happen. But a movie like this is really hard to make, right? Like Hollywood doesn't make a lot of these kinds of movies anymore. I mean, it's a Marvel world, and those are the things that make money. Those are the ones that do well, because a lot of times they're making movies for like the Chinese market, right? There's a huge market in China. So what's going to get people into the theaters? It's like explosions and cool stuff like that. Like sad dudes doesn't get people into theaters, So it was a really hard road to get this made. And in the midst of all of it, there were a lot of different people who'd signed on and, signed off and all that stuff. So it went from Channing Tatum to, every one of the Chris's in Hollywood, at some point was attached to this. Justin Timberlake at one point, I think his name was thrown in there. And so it was just kind of this weird experience. And then suddenly my agent called one day again, and it was like, I hadn't heard from her in like a year.
Is this your book agent or your CAA agent?
It's my CAA agent, who then left CAA and kind of bounced around a little bit. And also my book agent, because I'm very much of the mind that like, I kind of wanted everybody to come along with me, you know? And so I told my book agent at the time, who when she was at one agency and ended up leaving. And at the time, her first agency didn't do a lot of TV and movie stuff. And then when she created her own, they started doing it. And I was like, well, I already have this other person, but I'll just pay you too. So I'm like just paying everybody double, which is fine. I just felt like, if you have people that you trust and you care about, like just pay them out, and like the money, you'll figure it out someday. Like it'll come to you. It felt like karma or something, I guess. So anyway, so I was both of them most of the time, but the movie agent, her name is Sherry, and she was like working really hard to make all this happen behind the scenes. And she'd been working with this guy named David, and his name kept popping up, and I'd been hearing his name for years, David Bobert. And he had been moving kind of different places in Hollywood. And I still, because like, again, I'm way outside of the world of Hollywood. I don't understand how this all works. He was working at a production company, or he was working at Sony, but at some point they finally got everything in order and everything got lined up, and they said, okay, we also have a star for this movie now, and it's going to be Kevin Hart. And as we talked about earlier, like we look somewhat similar, but there's a few differences. And so
mostly just the height thing.
Just the height thing and the abs.
Right. Height and abs. But other than that, if you squint, same guy.
Same guy. And so one of the things that I thought was really cool about it was that, like, because if you haven't figured it out yet, I'm like the whitest of white guys in the world. And
you're Minnesota white.
I'm Minnesota white. Like I burn in 3 seconds outside. And what I loved about this casting decision was that it's not something you see typically in Hollywood, right? Like for basically its entire history, Hollywood's gone the other way, right? Like they've done just an awful job of whitewashing stories of, people of color in every community. And so it's really shitty when that happens. In this case, it was awesome, right? Because what they were doing, and what I loved about it, was that they were taking a story that I have always talked about as being universal, right? That's when I sold my book to the publishers, when I went in and go meet with different agents and everybody else. Why do you they would always say, like, why do we want to put out your book? Why do we want to put out this movie? Why do we want to represent you? Because it's a story that everybody can relate to. Maybe it's not your wife dying, or your husband dying, or your partner dying, whatever it is. Like, we all have these moments in our lives where we have just incredible joy, and we can relate to that. And we can also relate to just the most devastating, joyless moments that we all encounter, right? We're going to experience life. We're going to experience death. Those are our two guarantees. And all the stuff that happens in between is like what makes us individuals. But those two moments, which I got to experience in a 27-hour period, just like we can all get there. And I thought, if we can turn this around and we can make this a movie that relates to everybody, and it doesn't have to be told from a white lens, and it shouldn't be, I think, in a lot of ways. I thought that was brilliant. And I thought, Jesus, man, like Hollywood finally got this right. And I was really proud to sign on to something like that and to be a part of it. And I know there's like a lot of issues with Kevin as a person, right? Like he said some stuff over the years that has obviously been just like deplorable. I don't stand behind some of the things that he said. I think he's atoned for it in a lot of ways, maybe not in a way that like Twitter wants him to atone for it sometimes, but I think he's done a pretty good job of talking about it. He's done some interviews during the cycle of this movie, and go ahead, accuse him of, you know, trying to do an image rehab with this movie. Maybe he did.
Oh, that hadn't even occurred to me.
I've read it a few places.
Yeah.
I didn't think about it till I read it, but who cares? If he's trying to rehab his image with something like this, and he's actually going about and making changes in the way that he talks about, you know, what would happen if his son were gay or whatever, like, good. Like then he's had to think about this and he's had to make different decisions and say different things. And I think that's really important. So I was worried that people would dismiss this out of hand and say like, well, fuck Kevin Hart because he's done all these terrible things. But the fact that it's done as well as it has, and I've read a couple of things from people who really do take, they don't really like what he said. It was really awful, but they were able to look past it and say like, okay, this movie's done a really important thing where it's turned this cast, and it's a black cast. And I read a writer in England talking about this, and she was saying like, these are dark-skinned actors telling a story that's not a black movie. You know what I mean? And it's really hard. I don't want to talk about race because this is not my world to be speaking, and I shouldn't be talking about this too much. But in talking to Kevin and talking to the people involved with this movie, without fail, every one of them said is like, we want a really positive depiction of strong black fatherhood. And we want a strong black family. We want to see, you know, somebody relying on their friends and family in a way that you don't see in movies like this, right? Like Kevin will talk about this all the time in interviews. He'll say, you know, it's like he wasn't a criminal. He wasn't doing anything wrong. Something bad happened and he relied on his community to get him through it. And there's no backstory. He's an executive in an internet company. He's doing these great things. There's nothing there that like anybody's going to peg as stereotypical in any way. Right. Which I really like about that movie. It could have been rewritten in lots of different ways because the screenplay was written by somebody, Dana Stevens, who's amazing and who we'll talk about as you were asking the question about how involved I was as this happened. But Dana was amazing. But then when a director comes on, it often happens where the director ends up, you know, they do rewrites. It's just part of the process. And they do rewrites oftentimes to kind of accommodate the actors that are involved. And Kevin's story, he has a very unique story about his life with his dad. And they changed up a lot of that. So the fact that my dad is a philanderer and a drunk in the movie is to be a little closer to Kevin's real life experience so that he could draw on that for, you know, his acting. And I think it actually worked pretty well for him. So.
Yeah. So then like certain things like Maddy in the movie wanting to wear pants, you mentioned your daughter being a tomboy, and meeting Lizzie, which are not in the book. Yeah. So how did you work with them to bring the like updated parts of your life to the movie?
The good news is that because of the promise they made to me from the beginning, which was, we want to honor your family, we want to do this right, they talked to me a lot. The screenwriter Dana would call me up just random times and be like, what kind of car did you drive? Which seems like a dumb thing, but she was like, are you driving like a Lamborghini around town, or are you like a regular guy that has like a Honda? And it was like, you know, and because she didn't know, I mean, she read the source material, she read the blog, she read the book, but I'm not talking about what kind of car I drove. Yeah. I was driving a Honda and I traded in for a Nissan, and I was trying to get the cheapest one available because I don't give a shit about cars. You know, and so that gives you an idea of who the person is. And so she was asking questions like that. I was like, well, you know, tell me about some of your friends that, and she's like, I'm thinking of like a friend who's like single and somebody you maybe wouldn't leave your kid with if you had to go out for a night or something. And I was like, oh, I have a lot of those. I live in LA. You live in LA. You know, like what men under 40 in LA are typically like, right? So I was like, yeah, that's all of my friends. So they took elements of those friends to create the characters, and they took elements of my life to make the movie better and to enhance it. Because again, if you're making a movie based on my book covers the first year of Maddy's life. It's boring as shit. Like, what do babies do in the first year? Like, they roll over, and that's like their biggest milestone. They're not talking yet. They're not doing anything cool. Maybe they'll walk if you're really lucky. She didn't walk till she was like 16 months old. So, even in writing the book, my editor was like, I need more of Maddy's personality in here. And I'm like, she's one. She doesn't
They don't have them. Yeah.
Like, if you've been around, she was 23. I was like, have you ever been around a fucking kid? Like, they don't do anything at this age.
Yeah.
So all of that stuff, like when the first third of the movie or so was kind of that first year of our life together. And then the other 2/3 are like fast forwarded into Maddy being about 8 or 9 years old, me meeting Lizzie. And that's where I think kind of the richness of the movie comes in. That's like the uplifting parts of it, the happier parts. And I think the better part of the movie is when you get past that kind of sadness and you fast forward into the fictionalized version of our life, but kind of based on our reality.
Right, right. You have on 2 wedding rings.
I do. Yeah, you noticed that.
I did.
So I have on my left fingers my wedding ring to Lizzie, so my current wife, and I moved my other wedding ring to my right finger, and I can never get it off now because I got fat. but yeah, I always I kept those things on for the first year or so after Liz died. I had her like engagement ring and her wedding band on my pinky, and I knocked out one of the diamonds on her.
Oh no!
On her wedding band, and I was like, "Shit, I probably shouldn't wear this around anymore." And it was getting weird. Like, I was walking around with a pinky ring, and people were always asking me questions. So I was like, "I got to get rid of this." But yeah, to me, it's like one of those things. And I talked to Lizzie about it before we got married. I was like, I don't want to take this off, but I don't want you to think that like I love her more than you. And it's a hard thing to balance, right? Like, you don't want to be one of those people that only talks about your late partner. And then your other partner sitting in the corner being like, well, what about me?
Right.
Like it can't be like that. And I think that's another nice thing about the movie is that, actually Liz, my late wife, is only a small part of this movie. I mean, I guess you want to talk about it in a weird spiritual way, like her spirit is throughout, but most of the movie focuses on my life trying to like move through all my sadness and stuff with a new person. And that depiction of our relationship is completely inaccurate in terms of how we met. We didn't meet as a setup. I met her on an airplane, but they couldn't put that in because who would believe that, right? Like who meets somebody on an airplane? It was on a Southwest plane, super weird. But that really happened. And then, I didn't have any problems. Like when I met her, I was like, oh, this is great. Like she integrated well into our little family, and Maddy loved her from the beginning. And, it was just kind of an easy situation. I dated other people before that, and it was awful in a lot of ways. And so this was like such a nice and natural experience. And I was like, well, this is where I want to be,
I wondered, because in the movie, he is a little bit hesitant. Like I don't want to give it away, but something happens and then he's like, I'm not ready Maddy's not ready for this. So that didn't really happen. None of that really happened.
Not with her. I think maybe early on I kind of felt that way, or like maybe it helped me, or it kept me from getting deeper involved with other people that I'd met along the way. I don't like to talk about any of that, but it's one of those things where like, yeah, I think maybe I was really hyper focused on her, but by the time Lizzie came around, and this was I met her, I think in like the end of 2012, and we didn't start dating until, middle of 2013. It was like one of those things where like I was past all that. I was ready for us to have like another person in our life and to be somebody that we could kind of move forward with and like have a real life. I mean, Maddy had been begging for a sibling. She wanted a brother for so long. And obviously that wasn't going to happen right away, but we waited for a bit, and now Maddy does have a sibling, and she's got another one coming in October. So it's like we've got now kids that'll be 11 years apart and now 13 years apart. And that's something that I saw in Lizzie, and I saw somebody that I could spend the rest of my life with who also got where I was coming from, just like anybody else in the world. She's experienced some loss in different ways. She had a nephew that she was incredibly close to who died.
Oliver.
Yeah, Oliver died. And that was, I had met people along the way who hadn't really experienced that kind of stuff, but there's a bond that comes along with that grief, and you find ways to kind of like support one another. And so she's always been really understanding of like, and I'm not always great at communicating how I feel about, what's going on March 25th, which is the day that my wife died. And so she's always like, I'm here, whatever you need me to do. If you want me to leave or you want me to like go with you somewhere, like, and she's just there. And I love that. She's just always there to try to help however I can, or however she can. But I don't know how to tell her how to help me. So she just does whatever. And it's really great.
Do you dream about the first Liz?
I used to. I don't so much anymore. And it was always the same dream. It was we'd be somewhere else, usually on the East Coast somewhere, and I would see her with another family. And she'd be with like another dude and like a bunch of kids. And I'd be like, hey, what's going on? Like, where have you been? You know, like, where did you go? And she's like, well, I got this other family here. And I'm like, but Maddy's really cool. Like, I want you to see who she is as a person. I want you to see her growing up. And she's like, great, but I got this other family now. And that
was that when you already had another family?
No.
Okay.
It was before that. It was just like a weird thing where, you know, because I don't think the brain does a good job of processing death, right? It's one thing if there's, and this is not to diminish a long-term illness, but when somebody's perfectly healthy sitting in front of you at one moment and then the next moment they're gone, like how does your brain process? Like, how do you figure out how to deal with that? Because I still don't get it. Like and for a year afterwards, I would think about like calling her, and I knew she was gone. I'm very rational when it comes to this stuff, but it's still like your brain can't, as much as you try to talk it into it, you can't tell yourself like, oh, this person's you're never going to see them again. You're never going to talk to them again. This is where I wish I was religious, where I could be like, oh, I'm going to see her in heaven or some shit. But because I don't believe in that, like it's such a final thing for me where it's like, she died and fuck, I'm never going to see her again. And there's nothing more depressing than that. You know, it's fucking awful to think about that. And yeah, so those dreams were just horrific.
Yeah.
I don't dream, or at least I don't remember my dreams. I always had one dream where like I never finished grad school because I failed my stats class. But I actually, like, I graduated. It was one of those things where I didn't walk because it was like a mid-year graduation. But my grad school gave me an alumni award a couple of years ago. And as soon as I got that award, I was like, that was gone. I finally like had some like
resolved.
Yeah, it was resolved, and it was great. And I think maybe now that I'm married and you know, I have another kid coming and I have another kid, like that seemed to me that kind of like knocked out that feeling of like, oh, you left us, like you disappeared from our lives, which is never a feeling I had, you know. I think it was that same social worker in the hospital who said, like, told my dad actually, after a couple of days, was like, you know, Matt's going to be angry and he's going to feel like Liz left him. And consciously speaking, I never felt that way. It's not like she just chose to walk off with some other dude. She died and she had no control over it. And I know that she would have done anything in the world to not have died. And so like, you know, there's all these like therapists out there, or the people that will kind of tell you about these like stages of grief and stuff. And for some people that works really great. I think therapy is 100% important for everybody. But sometimes those stages didn't work for me. And for somebody to tell me that I was going to feel a particular way because they'd read about it in a book or something, was like, well, it didn't ring true to me, and it didn't actually work. And so maybe that was what informed those dreams or something. But like, I'm just glad to be rid of them as much as I possibly can be.
Yeah, I was curious. The reason I was curious about the rings, but I guess I was wondering, and you sort of alluded to this, you might have already answered it, but I was wondering, does Lizzie ever feel like there are 3 people in this marriage?
I don't think she does. That would be a good question for her next time you have her here. I don't think she does. I try to do a really good job of not making it feel that way. I don't know if I'm successful, but you know, 13 years have passed. Yeah. And you know, the grief that I feel, which is still present, as I said earlier, is not the same as it was 13 years ago. I don't have a blog anymore. I'm not trying to engage people or make people remember that, like, hey, you know me because I'm a sad dude. What I want people to see, and my basic means of communication these days, is Instagram. Like, I just love sharing photos. It's just something I do. I don't care. It's nice that people care, but I'm not doing it for them. I'm not doing it for an audience. I don't have any sponsors. I don't get sponsored posts. I truly, and this is going to sound terrible, I don't care if people buy my book. I don't care if people watch the movie. It's great that they do, but none of this was my end goal. The book is for Maddy. The book it's dedicated to her. I want her to read it someday. I want her to have a document of what my life was like with her for that first year. That's all that matters to me. I know my publisher wants people to read it. I know my publisher wants people to buy it. And I know Netflix and Sony and everybody wants people to watch the movie, but that's not my end goal. So if that's not my end goal, and it's not, my goal is really just to keep Liz's memory alive for Maddy and for me, then it takes away all that public shit
Yeah.
which can make Lizzie feel bad. Because it's easy to reassure her and say, no, I love you. Like, there's no competition here. I'm not comparing you to her. I'm not pitting you against one another. And this happens a lot I know a lot of widowed people who have gotten remarried, and they're still out there trying to have an outward show of their grief, right? Because it becomes their brand. It becomes something that they have to live with to continue to get sponsors for their website or whatever it might be for their podcast, for just in real life. Like, I mean, I have people who are writing books about this, who are still trying to talk about that grief in the same way that they did when their partner died.
Is it a financial thing, like you're saying? Let me rephrase. Is there also an element of it though, that's like, I feel guilty moving past this?
I think it's all the above. I mean, there's probably a financial aspect to it. I would think maybe that's not the case. Some people, I think, genuinely need to continue to talk about it a decade later, or 20 years later. And other people just like I said, somebody told me one time, I liked you better when you were sad.
Was this like a person on the internet?
Yeah, this was like a blog comment or something, or somebody wrote me a letter about my book. I don't remember what it was, but it was something really awful like that. Yeah. And to me, like, I honestly don't give a shit. Like, I truly don't care. I mean, I to a fault, I don't care about these things. And so I think that there's this level of like, you want to feel accepted and you want people to like you. And it's really hard for people to criticize you when you're talking about a dead partner. Yeah. You know what I mean? I got criticized a lot, and I'm sure people out there who do this get criticized. But you get criticized a lot less when you're talking about your sad moments than you do if you're talking about your successes and all the things that are happening as a result of this sad thing. And so it's really like, sometimes it's like a diversion, right? Like, hey, I've got all these great things happening. I've got this book. I've got this movie coming.
And
by the way, don't forget my wife died and it was really fucking awful. Like, that's a given. Like, it's awful. It's still awful. I don't need to tell you all the time that it's awful. I don't need to put up a photograph every couple of days and remind you, like, hey, by the way, the reason you're here is because my wife died. Like, everybody knows. And if they're following me in the interim and they haven't figured this out, well, I guess it's going to be pretty shocking when they find out that I'm talking about two different ladies named Liz and I'm married to both and one of them's dead. You know, it's like, it just feels dirty to me. Like, because, and also it's like, I feel dirty about a lot of it just on my own. Like, having a blog at one point, like, feels, I mean, it's, like I said, a relic of that time period, but it also just feels really gross now. Part of the reason I took it offline is because I was like, I don't want this, like, as public record, really. I just want it gone.
Why?
I'm embarrassed, probably. I don't know. It just feels like, to me, it just feels like a relic of that time. And I said a lot of stuff, and I opened myself up in a lot of ways that, like, I think if I hadn't been in the midst of, like, some pretty horrible grief, I wouldn't have.
So, like, the vulnerability being just out there feels weird.
Yeah, definitely. And like I said, I feel like it was there and people read it and you got what you needed out of it. I got what I needed out of it in terms of, like, getting my feelings out and all of that. But I don't need to remind everybody, like, hey, I was once this. When like I said at the beginning, you know, I like to be introduced as a homemaker. I don't like people talking about me as an author or as a writer. I wrote this thing 10 years ago. Or it's been out for 10 years. I wrote it 12 years ago. I don't consider myself a writer. I wasn't a writer then. I'm not a writer now. I'm a stay-at-home dad. I take care of my youngest daughter while my wife works and does amazing things in the world. And I, run my 13-year-old back and forth to school and different things. And that's my life. And that's what I prefer to do. And so now that the movie's out, the book is back out being talked about, everybody's like, so what's next for you? And my answer is always the same. It's like, I want to go back to anonymity. I want to go back to, like, living with my family and not thinking about this shit all the time. Like, I don't want to talk about movies. I don't want to talk about my book. I really liked that 10-year period where, like, okay, the book was out for a little bit. I did, like, a press cycle, and then the paperback came out a year later and I did a much more compressed press cycle. And then for 9 years, nobody cared about me. It was great. And I look forward to that again. But at the same time, I also really like this opportunity to come out and, like, talk about some of this stuff because it helps me work through my feelings too. Like, this is great therapy for me right now.
Well, you're welcome.
Because I don't know how to deal with this stuff sometimes. Like, I don't know how to feel about other people talking about their stuff and, like, constantly reminding everybody about their grief. Like, I know that they have their reasons, but I have lots of friends in this community. I mean, there's, like, millions of them now that I've met throughout the world. Not literally millions, but hundreds for sure. And it's really hard. I mean, I've witnessed some of them start up, different organizations and then find love and then find out like I'm not as devoted to this thing as I once was.
Right.
A friend of mine who lives in Texas was very much a part of that. She was doing great things for widowed families of like military like spouses, and it was great. And she was like, I'll never get married. I'll never find love again. And then she did, and then it was like she kind of disappeared, which I kind of respect. Like she was like, I'm done. But she was also trying to figure out a way to like hold on to like that sadness so that everybody knew who she was, and that just because she found happiness again doesn't mean she doesn't feel that sadness.
Yeah, it's tough. do you know who Mary Catherine Ham is?
Yeah.
I've had her on my show a number of times, both before her. So you know about her husband was, he died in a bike accident suddenly, tragically. I had her on the show before that, and then I've had her on sort of throughout that. And then now she's remarried and is pregnant with her third child with her new husband. And she talks a lot about the experience of losing her husband and of like working through that grief, and a lot of, I think, similar to you, a lot of new widowers reach out to her, and she kind of, and she was saying that like, when you're right away, the idea that you won't always feel this way, that you won't always be sad, like that doesn't sound good to you because it sounds bad, actually.
Yes.
Which I think is so interesting.
It sounds awful. And it's like, it feels like you're just like totally getting rid of this person who died.
Right.
You're just throwing them in the trash. And so that's the initial, if you want to talk about like stages, it's not grief. It's like stages of like moving forward. It's like, I am never going to get over this. I'm never going to date anybody again. I'm never going to be happy again. And then it's like, okay, well,
right. Like I'll live my life as a permanent reminder that it's fucked up that this person's gone.
Yes. I'm going to wear black all the time. And I'm going to, women are going to wear a veil forever. Like,
right.
I'm just going to keep my wife's clothes in the house at all times forever. And we're not
keep her shows on the DVR.
Yeah, exactly. Which I did for a little while. And it was like, you're going to preserve that just as it was. Like in every movie, right? Like some teen dies in a car crash and suddenly like the room stays like that forever.
Yeah.
And those are the things that we're kind of like fed. And so it's less of like, hey, it's healthy to say, I'm going to take this stuff out of the house and I'm going to move forward in a way that's meaningful. Like I have to think about it in a practical way too. Sometimes it's like, okay, God, I don't really want to throw this vacuum away. She bought it and like, but it's like the vacuum like is kind of a piece of shit now. Like the vacuum technology has moved forward in so many ways. Do you have a Dyson ad?
No, but I do have a Dyson.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, so do I. And so it's like I think about it sometimes. I'm like, oh, but she would want the new vacuum.
Right.
So like I'm getting rid of this. It's like she was like a power BlackBerry user, right? And I remember when I got my first iPhone, I was like, oh, she would hate this. And I was like, no, she wouldn't. She would have gotten rid of this shitty old technology and bought an iPhone, And so it's like those moments where I think like you're trained in your grief to like try to hold on to this weird stuff, and it's okay to let go of it because that person would have let go of it too. And to the point where like I lived in our house with, Lizzie moved in with us eventually into the house I bought with my late wife, and I was there 13 years, and it was time to go. Like we were having another baby, we needed more space, and so we were going to sell the house. And I think in my mind, I was like setting myself up for this like really depressing, like, oh my God, they're going to have to pull me out of my. No, I was the only one who didn't care. We sold the house and I was like, great. I'm so excited. We're moving to a bigger house. We're going to have a bigger yard. We're going to get away from these shitty neighbors that we had, all this stuff. And Lizzie was sad about leaving it.
That's so interesting.
And I thought like, oh my God, like that's so crazy that she feels that way. She was only in the house 2 or 3 years. But she felt that way. And Maddy felt that way till she saw her new room at the new house. She was like, oh, this is like, my room is now as big as our old living room. So I'm cool. And so sometimes it's okay to let go of this stuff. And I think we have to be okay with it because a lot of people tell us we can't let go of it. We have to be the sad person that they fell in love with. Otherwise, like what's going to happen to our audience if we're no longer sad, right? They're going to send you messages saying, I liked you better then. That's a scary thing for people.
And last question, Obama is involved in this movie. Have you talked to him? And how did all that happen?
I don't think anybody should let me talk to Obama. Like if there's one,
Barack Obama, in case they're like, who do you mean?
And Michelle, because it's their production company's involved. And so the reason they shouldn't let me talk to them is because I would just be.
Oh, you actually did talk to him?
No, they didn't.
Oh, okay.
No, I think I told everybody involved. Is like I would love to meet them. I think they're like 2 of my favorite people in the whole world. Like I voted for him twice. I would have voted for him 10 times if I could have. Just as people, they're unimpeachable. Like they're just amazing human beings. Everything they touch is incredible. And so we had this whole thing with the movie where it was supposed to be a theatrical release, right? This was a big Sony movie. We're talking like, movie premieres, red carpets in 200 plus countries. Not that they were going to send us to all these things, but like this was going to be a gigantic movie for Sony. And then COVID hit. And so they finished filming this in the fall of 2019. And Kevin came home the same week that he had come home. He got into that car accident and broke his back.
Oh, yeah. I forgot about that.
They finished shooting on Tuesday. I think he broke his back on the Friday or Saturday. So, and he recovered really quickly. And so they were still on track to like release this thing in the early part of 2020. So I saw a cut of it in January and, it was looking really good. I was really excited about it. And then COVID hit and it was like, oh shit, now what are we going to do? So dates were jumping back and forth and all this stuff. And eventually the producers and my agent, everybody came back to me and they said, we have this really cool opportunity. We can't do a theatrical release. We don't think it's the time for it. We don't think people are going to come out to a movie like this, right? Like they want to go see Fast 9 or something. Cars are going to be exploding and whatever. But to ask people to come out in the midst of this thing, which is still going on and still running rampant in a lot of parts of the country, it doesn't seem right to ask them to come see a sad movie about people dying, So they're like, Kevin has this deal with Netflix that he signed, and we think Netflix is a really good home for this. And I thought, at first I was kind of disappointed because it's like, this is my one opportunity in life to like walk a red carpet and get excited about, and it sounds stupid and superficial, but I was like, this is going to be cool for Maddy. I want her to be able to experience this. And it was going to be great. And then that all got taken away. And so they're like, we're going to do this Netflix thing. And then I got a call from this producer, David Bobert, who I've been talking to forever. And he's like, I just want to give you a little heads up. There's going to be some news dropping in the next like couple of days. I don't know when, but he's like, through their production company, Barack and Michelle Obama are going to sign on as producing partners for this movie. And I was just like, I just started crying because it's like, you go through all this shit and like some of it you expect, this movie's happening and you're expecting all this stuff to happen. And it's pretty cool. Like just as a person, it's like, oh, cool. They're making a movie about your life. That's pretty neat, actually. And then you find out that Obama knows your name. Because that's all I heard. It was not that he's producing this movie, but he knows my name. He's heard my name in this movie because they kept my name in it. And so I thought, like, I'm glad that he knows my name that way, and it's not like he had to like commute my sentence or something. I was like, I was like a death penalty case.
And they're
something.
looking for another January 6th insurrectionist, Matt Logelin.
Yeah, exactly. And those are the things that like I think probably most of my family might be known for, not the insurrection, but just dumb shit. And so it was kind of like, it was a nice feeling and it felt like validating in a lot of ways, right? Because, I wrote this book and I don't consider myself a writer. And you think about all the places this has gone, which I never expected. Like I wrote it. I thought maybe my mom would read a couple of copies. I never expected to end up on the bestseller list. I never expected to sell as many copies as I've sold. I've never expected it to be back in print now with a new title. I don't know if you saw this, but it's got a new cover with Kevin. And
I did see that. Yeah.
Yeah. I should have brought you one. I'll make sure you get one, but they changed the cover. I added some stuff and I added a new chapter, all this different stuff, but I never expected that 10 years after the initial publication that this book would be out. And now, all these crazy experiences, all these crazy, like, surprises. And then to get a call saying that Barack and Michelle Obama are signing on to produce this thing. It's like, it blew my mind. Like, how do you even process that? And so when I was talking to the producer, I was like, David, like, he's like, yeah, I'm hoping to get you and Kevin and Barack and hopefully Michelle on a Zoom at some point. And I was like, no, because I will say something so embarrassing and I'll just ruin, like, he'll just want to sign off as a producing partner. Like, it'll just be over. So I was like, maybe I would love to talk to him. Like, there's nobody I'm very happy to be here.
Thank you. I know you're
just
saying.
Above you.
Right.
Is Barack and Michelle. And like, I would love to speak to them. I'd love to be able to talk to them about a lot of different things. And I think, I hope that someday I get to talk to them because I think it's so cool what they've done. And they took a movie that I think could have gotten a lot of criticism in a lot of different ways because of Kevin's involvement, that kind of stuff. And getting them involved just took that off. I mean, some people are still going to criticize Kevin.
Yeah, it's kind of unimpeachable.
Right. When they sign on, it's like they see value in this. And if they see value in this, there's value in it. Like, there's not too many people that can put their name on something and you can immediately say, like, yes, there's value in this because they say there's value. And so it made me feel so good and so validated that even if this movie was, and I didn't know if it was going to be a terrible piece of shit. You know, like I'm not a good judge of this stuff. It's my own life. I can't tell you like this is going to be a great movie or it's going to be awful. But if it was going to be awful, at least they were a part of it, you know? And thankfully it wasn't awful. And thankfully they're a part of it. And even if it only was number one on Netflix in the US for one day, I would have been thrilled. Like it would have been really cool to say like, hey, this happened. I talked to people at Netflix. They said, this is really difficult in a world where you only have to stream 2 minutes of something and it's a TV show and whatever, people can goose those ratings pretty easily. So for it to be number one on Netflix in the US for 6 straight days, and it's been in the top 10 since then, it's now going on 2 weeks since it's been out. And then to be number one in 82 countries around the world was like, mind-blowing.
Yeah.
And then to have Barack put something on Twitter about it, I kind of like I didn't even know how to handle that, but I was like, I know he's not talking about me directly. He's talking about Kevin. He's talking about the movie. He's talking about his financial role in this thing. But
still.
In the back of my mind, I'm like, he knows who I am, and this is so weird.
Yeah.
And that to me is like the ultimate tribute. It's like all of this stuff that happened, like Liz's name is living on, right? Like somebody knows that she's the root of all of this. And I think that's such a cool thing. Like somebody who is so obsessed with like, you know, Us Weekly and all those kind of rags, you know, she would just be losing her mind to know that this was happening because of her and her name and all of that. And so that's another one of those things that makes me feel better about being an asshole and taking money for something that seems like exploitation. It's like, I can in my mind, I can also say like, no, she would love this. She would love that this was about her. She would love that she was at the center of all this, you know, in a very cool narcissistic way. She'd just be like, holy shit, this is me. I did this. And I love that. I love that. I
lied when I said that the other thing was the last question. How does Maddy feel about all this?
Oh, she's so funny because she's really shy. And so she's, because of our move and all sorts of stuff, she's kind of bounced around a couple different schools. She was at one school. We put her in another one because the first school was kind of shitty. And then when we moved, she got her last year of elementary school in La Cañada, but that got cut short because of COVID. And then her 7th grade year got cut. I mean, she only had like 3 weeks of school. So she has friends, but she doesn't know them well enough to be like, hey, this is what's going on in my life, and not come off as like somebody who's trying to brag. Also, it's really hard to discuss this movie, not so much because like her mom died. I think she's talked about it a lot, and she's done some press for this, like some local news stuff. But it's really hard to get people to believe that this movie's about her when they see a young black girl playing her. Like she could say this, and if they don't watch the movie, they're not going to hear her name, you know?
Yeah.
The title of the movie doesn't match what the old book title was. So it's this thing where she doesn't want to come off as bragging, you know? In the same way that she doesn't want to brag about Lizzie and Wendy, right? Like her other mom and her aunt are these really amazing TV writers, and they're doing great stuff all over Hollywood. But Maddy doesn't walk in and be like, oh yeah, my mom created this TV show. You know, she just doesn't do it. She doesn't want to talk about it. So she's just shy about it. She's just like, she wants to hold it all in. And it's the same thing where like, she's not impacted by all this, even though I think you probably hear this from a lot of people, but I feel like we're like the least Hollywood of anybody in Hollywood. Like we just don't, like we don't care about it. It's not like part of our life. It pays our bills, and and Lizzie loves what she does, but I don't want to do this shit anymore. Like I want to go, like I said, I want to go back to being a homemaker. And Maddy just kind of like, it's just normal for her. It's just like part of her life. And so she doesn't want to talk about it. She doesn't want to brag about it. She doesn't want people to think that she's got a big head about it. And I love that, you know, because if I were her at that age, I would be like, I'd be in school being like talking to my teachers, like, my dad wrote a book. Can I get an A in English? You know, like my mom is a TV writer. Like I'm also a great writer. Obviously give me an A in English. And so like, I would be using this in every possible way to like succeed in school and to make friends and all this. And she's just like, forget it, you know? She's at camp right now. She's off for a month as she goes every summer. And she told one of her camp friends. She's got like one really close friend that she's known for the last 6 years. And she told her. And I think that friend told a whole bunch of people.
Well, good.
Yeah. So like she went to camp the 2 days after the movie dropped. And so she's dealing with that now. And so I think some people at camp know, but it was cool that like this happened and she also kind of got taken away from all of it. She wasn't like, you know, she wasn't having to deal with any of the, you know, the numbers that were coming out about how many people streamed the whole thing or whatever. She just she got to see that the movie was out, and then she just disappeared for a month. And I think that's kind of a nice thing for somebody like her who just doesn't want to brag. So.
Right.
Well,
Matt, thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing your story. Tell everyone. Well, so the book is 2 Kisses for Maddy or Fatherhood.
I would say buy Fatherhood if you're going to buy it. There's some updated stuff. I also did an interview with Kevin in the midst of COVID. We did.
Yeah, I wish I should have bought that one.
Yeah.
I was being loyal to you.
That's very nice. No, buy the new one because there's a chapter at the end where I talk about Lizzie and our baby birdie. And,
I got to get that one.
Yeah, I'll make sure you get one.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, there's some new content in there, and it's just a little more up to date. Plus, it's nice. You get the whole like movie cover thing.
Yeah.
And, it's also cheaper too. I think it's on Amazon right now for like $3.99 for the Kindle version. Paperbacks are somewhere around like $13 or something. But yeah, buy it. It's called Fatherhood. It's really it's sad. Don't read it on a plane is my advice. Make sure if you are somebody who likes to drink, make sure you have a bottle of wine nearby and a box of Kleenex. Early on when the book came out, I was sending out I was doing giveaways for the book, and I was sending out little boxes of Kleenex and stuff.
That's funny.
A couple of bottles of wine went out too. But yeah, I would love it if you did. I know like I said, my publisher would love it if you bought the book. And there's some funny stuff in there. It's not all sad, but I think people have liked it in the past. I hope people will continue to like it.
Yeah,
we'll see.
I found it very riveting, heavy, but emotional, but really. Really well written for someone especially for someone who claims not to be a writer.
Well, I appreciate that. It's written in very plain English. Like I'm not a very smart guy, so it doesn't there's not a lot of metaphor in this. It's just like you're getting hit over the head with some stuff, whether it's good or bad or funny or happy or whatever. It's like, I'm just telling you how I feel in the same way that I talk.
Yeah.
Not very intelligently, but some level of communication happens, and so it's there.
Listen, if you like what you're hearing, please make sure that you are subscribed and leave us a nice comment, won't you? 5 stars. It helps people find the show, and it helps out the show. And I read those all the time, and sometimes I even read them on the show. So look, don't disappoint me with your lack of comments, you guys. And then also, I'm on Patreon, patreon.com/AllisonRosen. Patreon. Weekly bonus episodes, Zoom parties. There's a level where you can text me and I will text you back. You'll so much access to me, you'll beg me to leave you alone. But the texting is really fun. I've been having a ton of fun with it, and I think all the people who are at that level enjoy it. They seem to. So, and then also, if you sign up for a year, you can do an annual subscription on Patreon. Then you get 2 months free. So it's 12 months for the price of 10. Also, I'm an Amazon influencer. You can go to amazon.com/shop/AllisonRosen. Again, that's amazon.com/shop/AllisonRosen. And there's all these different lists. So you can shop my podcasting gear, makeup that I recommend, beauty stuff is also the same as makeup that I recommend, and home stuff and Daniel's Corner, all sorts of stuff. Go there. And follow me at Allison Rosen on Twitter and Instagram. Do you want to toss out your social media stuffs?
Yeah, I'm just basically on Instagram at Matt Logelin. And it's private, but I'll let you in if you're nice to me and you not an obvious bot that's trying to spam me with NFTs or something. I get a lot of crap like that. It's everybody's a Forex investor. So yeah, just you can follow me, and if I don't approve you,
it's because you might be a bot.
Yeah, I'm convinced that you're just trying to sell me something. So, but otherwise, yeah, you can find me there.
Awesome, Tony. What about you?
I'm at Tony Taxton on Twitter and Instagram. I plan to start bullying Allison online about the podcast equipment, so look out for that. And then my podcast Bizarre Albums every Tuesday.
Awesome. Thank you again, Matt. This was great. Listeners, thank you for listening. I love you. You matter. Goodbye.
Hey, do you know about the Allison Rosen Show? We had a good time, but now we gotta go.